And for more on this, we bring in Jamil Jaffer, National Security Institute founder and executive director. Sir, thanks for joining us on a holiday. Pretty challenging news on this front, on the Ukraine-Russia front. Today marks a deadline. It appears that it is passing without this next step, this great hope. There seemed to be some willingness towards the bilateral meeting between Putin and Zelensky, but now we're seeing potentially this deadline passing. And President Trump is being trolled a bit by some of those in Europe, specifically French President Emmanuel Macron, saying that if the meeting isn't set, that it will show again that President Putin has played President Trump. Your thoughts on this day? What does it mean? Where do we stand as these peace talks are continued to appear to be slowed to some extent?
Well, Molly, this is exactly a challenge. It does look in some ways like President Putin is trying to stick a thumb in President Trump's eye. You know, when right before the meeting in Alaska, he had cut the number of drone attacks on Ukraine to about 70. He's now doubled that up to 140. They're not quite at the July levels of over 200 a day, but he's significantly increased it, you know, sort of saying to President Trump, look, I'm not going to make a deal unless you put real pressure on me. And so President Trump, I think, has a decision to make now. Is he going to hold Vladimir Putin's feet to the fire? You also see Putin now meeting with India and China there in Shanghai, as Alex just said. And the problem there, of course, is that those are the two biggest buyers of Russian oil, with China buying about half of it and India buying another 40%. Together, 90% of Russian oil bought by China and India.
Those are some great points, and specifically these countries that Putin is meeting with, as you mentioned, China and India. He's also been cozying up to North Korea. And it appears that on that agenda among these nations is to push back on NATO, on Western influence. What is the message that they are trying to send to America and, more broadly, probably to Europe?
Well, in a lot of ways, what they're saying is the age of America is over. This is the new age of China leading with Russia and India alongside them. Of course, none of that is accurate. The United States is at our height of our power. We are there leading the NATO alliance and leading other alliances around the globe. We've got to demonstrate to countries like Russia and China they can't push back against us. And India needs to be with us and not with the Chinese and the Russians. And so I think for President Trump, that's a big decision to make. How does he handle now Putin and China and President Xi and China coming together and trying to recruit Narendra Modi, who has been close to President Trump, away from the U.S. alliance and into the Russia-China camp?
Yeah, there's a lot of messaging going on, and I think you hit on something important with these elevated attacks happening by the part of Russia in Ukraine, that they're hitting energy infrastructure there in Ukraine as well. Meanwhile, Russia's there at these meetings with countries that are big buyers of Russian energy in the energy industry. President Trump has promised repercussions, consequences. What will we see? Will we see different messaging out of the White House this week?
Well, look, President Trump has demonstrated the willingness to go after India when they've been buying Russian oil. He's imposed 25% tariffs, and yet India seems to continue to keep buying. So what needs to happen now is President Trump needs to press harder on India, harder on China, and say, look, you know, President Xi, you want a trade deal with us? You're going to have to come away from Russia. President Putin, if you really want to get a deal done in Ukraine, you've got to stop conducting this attack and stop upping them after you sat down with me in Alaska and tried to make a deal. And Prime Minister Modi, you want to have a real relationship with America. All these Indian immigrants that are here in the United States, you want to have a real relationship with the United States, you need to cut yourself off from our adversaries in China and Russia.
I want to get your thoughts just quickly on the political situation related to this here in the United States. This is Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat, speaking on CNN today. Listen.
Putin understands one thing, strength. He doesn't see it in Trump. Trump hasn't even picked a side he wants to win in this. If Trump wants to do something, he'll do something that will get Putin's attention, not a strongly worded post on some social media.
Your thoughts on that?
Well, look, it's interesting Congressman Quigley says that. Of course, President Biden only gave Ukraine enough weapons to survive in the fight. He didn't really give Ukraine enough weapons to win. And so this has been a problem not just of President Trump the first term or President Trump the second term, but President Biden right in the heart of this war, not giving enough capabilities to Ukraine to win. The question for President Trump is now, with Vladimir Putin sort of ignoring his entreaties for now the better part of 9 months, saying, hey, look, we need to make a deal. We need to get this war over. Will President Trump double down, give Ukraine everything it needs to win, and really push Vladimir Putin to the edge of having to make a deal and getting it done?
Yeah, potentially some big developments in this in the weeks ahead and potentially this week. Jamil Jaffer, thank you very much. You squeezed a lot of information in for us, and we greatly appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Molly.